In 30 years from now, when the economic history books are written about Trump's trade war, you can be sure of one thing. There's going to be an entire chapter titled Dolls. The White House appears to have latched on to this idea that promoting austerity measures for kids explains their case. And each day, there's a new message about dolls. So let's take a look at how this has evolved, shall we? I want to start with Trump on Sunday when he was asked about the potential for empty shelves.
I'm just saying they don't need to have $30. They can have 3. They don't need to have 250 pencils. They can have 5.
But you're basically saying there could be some supply shortages because of the tariffs.
We don't have to waste money on a trade deficit with China for things we don't need, for junk that we don't need.
I would have gone with the pencil analogy longer because it just resonates with school-age children, parents. But okay, your kids don't need more junk. But then Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had a new message for the boys and girls in America. Don't be sad about the dolls. It'll lead to a better life.
I would tell that young girl that you will have a better life than your parents. Your family will own a home. You will be able to advance. You will have a good education. You will have economic freedom. That's what we are advancing.
But it didn't stop there, because Vice President Vance today, he also mentioned the dolls and gave yet another explanation.
What I'd ask people is not whether they want $2 or $5 or $20 for their kids. Would you like to, God forbid, if your country goes to a war and your son or daughter is sent off to fight, would you like to know that the weapons that they have are good American-made stuff, not made by a foreign adversary?
The value of the dolls. With me now, the co-founder, president, and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management, Ross Gerber. Ross, glad you're here. I gotta ask you if you think this doll argument is playing at all on Main Street or Wall Street for that matter. Is it reassuring anyone?
Well, it's really troubling to have, like billionaires telling, the American families, which, for the most part are struggling still to, get ahead. And we've had the best economy in a long time with really low unemployment and real wage gains. And Americans are in a pretty good financial spot. So to then, throw us into a recession and tell the average American family that they don't need dolls when you're sitting at the UFC in front row with all your friends who are billionaires and gold plating the White House, billionaires telling average Americans to deal with austerity is really poor messaging at best.
When I look at the dolls too, I think to myself, it seems very almost dismissive and reductive to think about all this coming down to a conversation about dolls. But the president went on from there. He was asked today about traffic slowing down at U.S. ports. Ross, listen to his response.
We're seeing as a result, the ports here in the U.S., the traffic has really slowed, and now thousands of dock workers and truck drivers are worried about their jobs.
Yeah, no, that means we lose less money. When I see that means we lose less money.
Wait, so the business owners who can't afford to get their products here would obviously disagree, but what do you think the point he was trying to make was?
Well, I think most importantly out of this, to say it just sort of bluntly, is that Trump doesn't understand the economy at all. And we're not losing money through deficits or global trade. It's a transference of goods and capital for different needs. And in America, for example, the doll argument is absurd because really what Americans want is choice and low prices. And that's what's really driven capitalism since the beginning of time, is the idea of having, full competition globally, which gives American consumers the best choices in the world. And, when people from other countries come to America, one of the first things they say is they go to a grocery store and it blows their mind, the choices that they have. So taking choice away from Americans just isn't going to play well. So they can keep trying to sell Americans about austerity. But when people start losing jobs for real, it really dramatically affects real families. We're going to see a turn in sentiment against this administration if they don't come to terms with the fact that there isn't an immediate return to growth just when you completely, throw the whole trade, system into an imbalance. So So what we could have is a pretty bad recession, and in the best case scenario, no growth. And I just don't think it's so simple to say, well, things will just be great in the future. I've gone through some very hard times in America, like the financial crisis. And so I think it's just really narrow-minded to, run the ship into the dock and then say, don't worry, it'll only be a little bit of damage.
You mentioned capitalism, and you probably heard from the billionaire Trump supporter and Citadel CEO Ken Griffin, who told Politico today, quote, tariffs open the door to crony capitalism. The government starts to pick winners and losers. Now, the trade framework that Trump announced with the UK today, Ross, it would lower tariffs on luxury cars like Rolls-Royce, because everyone's getting one of those. Listen.
We took it from 25 to 10 on Rolls-Royce because Rolls-Royce is not going to be built here. I wouldn't even ask them to do that. It's a very special car, and it's a very limited number, too.
Raise your hand if you own a Rolls-Royce or that's your next purchase in the next, say, 10 days or 10 months. But while I wait for those hands, tell me, Ross, why is the argument that kids don't need dolls, but a Rolls-Royce and more luxury cars? Sign me up.
Well, this is exactly the picking winners and losers things that tariff causes, because the irony of this is that he's letting Aston Martin, Jaguars, and Rolls Royces, which, the UK makes about 100,000 cars a year that they send to the United States. And he's basically giving them an advantage over companies like Ford and GM, which manufacture in Mexico, that are still in a 25% tariff rate. So we've seen immediately the unions in Detroit reach out and say, hey, what are you doing? You're picking winners and losers here, and you're picking American companies as losers at this point. So it's not like Ford and GM can just change the global supply chain every month when Trump at his whims changed tariffs. So not only does it pick winners and losers, it's the uncertainty and the constant change that really throws business into turmoil, and what is really causing much more of the damage than even the tariffs themselves, because consumers are pulling back, businesses are pulling back, and everybody's going into defense, and that's exactly how you get a recession.
Ross Gerber, thanks for your insight.
Well, market optimism in anticipation of US-China trade talks in Geneva this weekend, and breaking this morning, a major concession from US President Trump suggesting an 80% tariff for China is more likely than 145%. Well, Chinese exports to the US sank by 21% in April, right as new tariffs took effect. But in a surprise to the markets, China's total exports actually rose more than 8% last month. Well, Justin Wolfers joins me now. He's a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. It's good to have you, Justin. What can we expect from the first round of these talks between the US and China in Switzerland this weekend, do you think?
Let me give you the optimist and then the pessimist. Look, the optimist in me is that both sides understand that this is unsustainable, that tariffs on China of 145% in China with retaliatory tariffs of 125% is effectively a trade embargo. No one can afford to pay tariff rates like that. And so what you've done is you've taken two biggest economies in the world and you've put a wall up between them. And even if that were your medium-term goal, you wouldn't want to do it all at once. You've left American manufacturers unable to get parts or inputs into their production, and likewise in China as well. So it's the American tariff on China is bad for people in America and bad for people in China. China's tariff on America is bad for people in China and bad for people in America. Hopefully they'll bring it down. The problem, of course, is that this is an issue that's been central to the president. Sorry?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, let's have a look at these numbers. China's overall exports grew by 8.1% in April. That was due to a surge in Chinese exports to countries in Southeast Asia and to Europe. Can we expect that sort of growth to continue to other countries to balance what is likely to be an expected decline to the United States, right? I mean, ultimately.
Yes. So there's two issues at play there. The first one is China is engaged in one trade war. The US is engaged in 192. And so what that means is when China can't find willing buyers in the United States, it will naturally look elsewhere. The second thing that's going on, though, that may be going on, is the single best way to reduce tariffs on Chinese-made goods into the United States is to send them through Malaysia and bang a Made in Malaysia label on it. That's not really how trade is meant to work, and it probably breaches a bunch of rules, but I have a sneaking suspicion when the incentives are this sharp that that's some amount of, if not what people were doing this month, what they'll be doing in future months.